There are many times in which I talk about how someone can push their politics with the medium of video games, and it couldn't get any more blatant than this one. Dark Souls is a video game about living under capitalism in 2020. This is an article where the writer uses Dark Souls as an analogy about the harsh realities of the real world in 2020, which is actually more apt if you think about it, and I'll explain why later. The problem comes when the writer uses this article to promote an economic system that is definitely not capitalism, one that not a lot of people are a fan of, and even express a passionate hatred for it, but that is to be expected with Vice. The article begins by talking about how living in 2020 is filled with the sense that the world as we know it is ending. It's even more harrowing when you realize that the world is burning down and slowly decaying, instead of a quick and painless death of the entire world blown off by a drop of a meteor or by a freaking big monster causing destruction everywhere. And we all had to suffer through it, which is totally like Dark Souls. The writer compares all of this phenomenon to Dark Souls and how that is about the world slowly decaying as well, and how igniting the flames of the world would only delay the inevitable, which is the world slowly succumbing into the darkness, and you, the player, is just an insignificant part of the equation, a cog in a machine continuously tasked to keep on repeating the same vicious cycle in a similar manner to how you as the player keep on repeating the same cycle of dying over and over again just to continue the game even further. The real life that we're living in is almost similar to Dark Souls in a sense. We too are living in a world slowly decaying further into chaos. What we can only do as human beings is to continue sustaining this dying world and making sure that it's at the very least a hospitable place to live for everyone else. We in turn become fire to the world. We become the one reason why it stays alive in the first place. There are some who might even see us as the virus to the world, halting its development into something better, something magical, something inspirational. But that's supervillain talk for you. I can even go so far as to say that Vice's article is a supervillain speech. It too recognizes we human beings as an imperfect method of sustaining the life of its earth, with capitalism as the primary cause of our decay as civilization, or at least according to the writer, as she goes on her tangent and how the 1% of the world is stealing everyone's wealth, and most importantly, the wealth of those disenfranchised people of color who clearly suffered the worst through capitalism's greedy and manipulative fingers. One that I would like to remind you that the writer, Vice in general, and most importantly From Softwares with Dark Souls greatly benefit from. But one can only blame this system for so long for failing them. The reality is, we as human beings just suck. We are the flames to the world, but flames will slowly run out. Human beings will eventually succumb into its weaknesses. Our constant need of reproduction is the only way for us to prolong our inevitable lives, but even that was used irresponsibly in favor of cheap flavors and temporary pleasure. We as human beings have grown irresponsible with our power, choosing to spend our time and money for the sake of impermanent joy instead of our own personal growth. Only a few individuals in this forsaken world are willing to commit themselves into growing to become better people and provide better lives for not just them but also everyone else around them. It is definitely not helped with the current state of the world right now, with some people being unable to accept that we're living in a pandemic and chose to sacrifice their own lives for the sake of personal pleasure, not knowing that doing so also endangers innocent people in the process who are doing their very best to make sure that they too don't suffer from the virus and acquiring its permanent damage. Oh, sorry, I was going on a tangent. Let's get back to the article. Unfortunately, it's really not worth the read. It's just the writer rambling about the current state of affairs and comparing it to Dark Souls, which, as I illustrated before, is not a terribly inaccurate comparison if you think about it for a second, but it is hilarious how a journalist applies the Dark Souls comparison not just to video games but also to real life in general. Imagine having a life so miserable that you can't be good at both video games and real life. It almost makes me feel kind of bad for them, or at least until they call everyone bigots in social media, in which case my empathy is thrown off the window. The writer ends the whole discussion by talking about one of the possible endings for Dark Souls 3, which is how you, the player character, decides to become the Lord of Hollows, allowing the player to free themselves and humanity in general from the gods. The writer interprets this as how we, as humanity in general, should proceed, not relying too much on the system that failed us, and instead carve our own future path to make sure that we are able to live our own lives. I don't exactly disagree with this philosophy, it's just that I don't see how this philosophy is against the philosophy of capitalism. The writer rejects the idea of waiting for the big government to help, which is somewhat comparable to rejecting the gods, but I thought the core of capitalism is centered on private entities seeking profits with little to no government intervention. Regardless, the writer encourages more community-level help for those in genuine need, distributing food, supplies, medical care, and all of that to those without any demands for profit. So to put it simply, the writer rejects capitalism in favor of communism, which I don't know about you, but that don't sound like the Lord of Hollow Dark Souls 3 ending to me. I thought that the point of the ending is to break free from the system and carve ourselves a new path, not to break free from one system so that we can be enslaved to another system, but hey, at least it alleviates the writer's own personal guilt for witnessing world inequality, one that the writer can only do best to combat by writing this absolute tripe. I'm just saying, writer, all of those things that you share to the community in need aren't cheap, and not everyone is willing to just give them away. As we have established previously, humans suck. They care more about temporary pleasure rather than improving themselves. Personal responsibilities and the quest for self-improvement are less fun than their movies, video games, and their insane loyalty towards a brand, all of which benefits greatly from this system that you love to criticize. It's baffling in how we can live in a world where people can so vehemently criticize the fundamental system that benefits them because they have their own personal guilt on witnessing the inequalities of the world, when they themselves are the biggest reapers of the benefits of that particular system. It's basically that meme from Merrick Andre. Forgive me for getting political when the writer straight up used Dark Souls to talk about something that would make Liberty Prime to go haywire. Hey kids, do you know that we're living in the year 2020 and not 2014? It seems that there are some people who don't get the memo, namely whoever is responsible for this upcoming film. BuzzFeed Studios, which is a thing apparently, is going to produce films centered around female gamers who are being discriminated by men. I thought we've already established that the Law and Order SVU episode was cringe, but apparently we need another reminder of this, and yes, that is actually Logan Paul in the episode. The story of this reminder that we're traveling back in time to 2014 is centered on a female gamer named Vivian Lee. Weird how you have to name the first name of your main character with the mascot of the movement that you so utterly despise, but alright then. Apparently Vivian Lee suffers from discrimination from her male counterparts in her college esports team. This is where we say get good scrub, but apparently saying that is bigoted now. We're living in the age where people demand Souls games to be easier to make it more accessible, which is like asking a scary horror movie to not be scary so that kids can watch it. In order to rebel against the evil men, Vivian gather up a group of all-women team that can compete with the boys and crush the patriarchy once and for all, or as the article describes it, to kick some serious gamer butt. You know what, article? If the show has a scene where these all-female gamers kick some serious Logan Paul butt, I might consider watching that film so that I can trash it alongside other YouTube reviewers, but then again, I'd be watching his boxing match. Now, if that's not some serious comedic gold, BuzzFeed Studios apparently produced this film to fulfill its mission to develop and produce socially relevant and high-concept feature films for global millennial and Gen Z audiences. By socially relevant, you mean dated by several years. By high-concept, you mean self-gratifying feminist fantasy. By feature film, you mean the latest punching bag for YouTube reviewers. And by global millennial and Gen Z audiences, you mean progressives that can't move on from a dead hashtag. Fun fact about the film, it's being directed by someone by the name of Kyle Newman, who apparently had a restraining order made by his wife due to an alleged abuse and how he called her really bad words in front of their two sons. Not exactly a family-friendly display, and certainly not the kind of person you'd appoint to make a film about female empowerment against the patriarchy. And even if that is discounted entirely, I love how a girl power film fighting against the patriarchy has to be directed by a man. It's like if Schindler's List is directed by Joseph Goebbels.